Artist, activist, and author J.L. Salazar has been quite open about her struggle with mental illness. From documentary shorts to songwriting, she shares glimpses of PTSD, depression, and anxiety, hoping to advocate for others who walk alongside her on this journey and suffer in silence. She uses her art to channel the helplessness, hoping that in its sharing, others can find sisters along their way, their path, and maybe not have to travel it alone. Here are pieces of an earlier interview with JL. You've been open in both your work and in interviews about your struggles with PTSD. Can you share a bit about what that's like for you personally?
Absolutely. This is a typical run-of-the-mill doctor appointment for me. They never can tell it's a panic attack. There's like this preconceived idea that it's all shaking and crying and hysterics, even though they're the experts and you would expect them to be able to tell, but they don't have a fucking clue. You would think they would be able to see. But they can't, don't, won't, I don't know. They're just fucking clueless. And I should be able to say the words, just look at them and say, "Hey doc, I'm literally in a panic right now." I mean, don't they teach them to read nonverbals or physical signs or something? So I just sit there time after time while they say, "Well, that blood pressure sure is high. We need to keep an eye on that." So dismissive that it's like, I swear there's a thigh slapping moment. And I want to scream. I just want to fucking scream. But all I can do is sit there. Sit there with my heart racing and my breathing coming like someone knifed me in the chest. And I just sit there, crying and screaming and panicking. Locked behind so many doors. Deafening in its silence. So yeah, every time. Routine visit, running tests, getting labs drawn, waiting for results, every damn time.
While we were chatting before the interview, you mentioned you have a new song you're working on. Could you play a little of that for us?
Sure, it's still a little rough around the edges, but sure, I can do that. Face down on the floor from hitting the wall. 90 miles an hour, hour after hour after hour. Fatigue, it keeps lingering from the weight of 1,000 souls, spilling their blood all over me, their tears, their joys and fears. They soak into my skin, crowd into my heart, flooding my empathy and robbing me of my strength. I stand without armor, stagger beneath their weight. My breath comes ragged as I crash into the wall and fall, face down on the floor from hitting the wall. 90 miles an hour, hour after hour after hour. There you go.
Thanks for sharing. Can't wait to hear the final product. Now, this next piece is a documentary short, correct?
Yeah, that's right. The pandemic was hard for all of us. I channeled a lot of that restless energy into the only creative outlet that was available at the time, creating in digital media.
The smell of latex makes me want to throw up. I have an appointment with the doctor, 8:45. Take a seat. Call you when it's time. As she takes her seat, she attempts to slow her heart and breathing, with her mind dictating both. As they begin to slow, her name is announced. On the short walk to the office, her moment's reprieve was lost. Her mind is in control, both heart and breath, if she is not in control of her mind, let alone the other two. Her bodily movements have slowed, while the other pieces of her race out of control, leaving her in a fog. She sits in his office, awaiting his presence, awaiting his assessments and pronouncements. She hears the knock on the door. tasting lead and temples throbbing. The doctor walks in, does his cursory exam, and like that, it's over. Never like that. It's always like this. Always everything pounding and adrenaline taking over. Her body is feeling the fatigue of 30 minutes, which always feel like an eternity. She collapses with exhaustion into the passenger seat and closes her eyes.
That segment was an autobiographical short by J.L. Salazar called Panic at the Doctor. In just a moment, J.L. will be joining us live via Zoom to update us on her latest projects. Excuse me, 1 second please. This virtual presentation has had a change of venue. JL will be joining us from an undisclosed location.
It's always like that. Every time. Every damn time. I make it to the car, I close my eyes, and my breathing and my heart rate begin to slow. And life begins its return to something next to normal. Not this time. This time, my blood pressure kept rising, my heart rate wouldn't slow, and I started to hyperventilate. So I had to wait. I had to wait in the office until it slowed down, until it all slowed down, but it wouldn't. It just wouldn't. And I started to feel trapped, so I started to pace around the office, and which obviously did nothing to slow my heart rate. So when the door opened, I just rushed at it to get out, because if I could just get out of the fucking office and reach the car, it would be okay. Because it's always like that. I get to the car and I'm safe. But they wouldn't let me leave, and they say when the door opened, I punched the nurse. But I don't remember that, you understand? I don't remember that. I remember a nurse came in at least 3 times to check my blood pressure, and one of the times they made me get undressed and hooked me up to some machine to check my heart, and they left me there. They just left me there. And it was cold, and because it never looks like I'm in a panic attack, they never believe me, so I just lay there naked with wires hooked up everywhere. And they ran their stupid test, and they told me nothing. Just came back in and told me I could get dressed again. No explanation, no diagnosis, no nothing. And so by the time they came in the 3rd time, I don't remember, okay? The last thing I remember is that I told them I had this presentation coming up and that it was important, and the door opened, and the rest is just gone, And now here I am, and they're letting me do this, but they wouldn't even let me unlock my computer. I had to give the nurse the password. There's 2 nurses in here now, watching everything. So I ask you, how do I sit here and discuss a project about mental health? How do I talk about how you navigate the mental health system in a way that they understand that you feel crazy? Like you need some meds and some help crazy? But not like crazy where they lock you up in a room and won't let you unlock your computer crazy. How do I do that? Wait, I'm out of time? But I didn't even get to talk about my project. Please. I just want to go home.
Hi, my name is Lindsay. I'm a first-year fiction student in the MFA program here at Southern Illinois University. Today, my presentation that I'm giving is called How Good is AI's Gaydar, which is essentially a comparative analysis project that I did. As part of the program here, we've been using AI art quite a bit. And through the process of learning how to use programs such as Midjourney and Night Cafe, I began to notice some interesting eccentricities, if you will. Now, the question began when I encountered aspects, which we'll get into as I go on with the presentation, as I started to encounter issues that I realized could have pretty serious implications for how AI art is being used, how it's being used in education, but also how it comments on the social zeitgeist around identity markers, and representation of identity, which, when we think about democratizing AI technology, becomes an extremely important question. So it kind of happenstance just through the course of using these programs. And then I thought it would be fun to delve into what that might mean, or what it could mean. So first, I kind of wanted to define gaydar. I feel like gaydar is a term that a lot of people feel like they know what it means, but essentially it is an intuitive sense that individuals of the LGBTQ community have, as far as intuiting people who might have a shared identity or a member of that community. Now, it's kind of been used in pop culture to essentially refer to anybody's ability to hone in on what someone's experience might be. But I will say that gaydar specifically was a very important survival strategy for a lot of LGBTQ plus and queer people, especially considering that it hasn't really been safe to be out and open, historically speaking, and that there are many places in the country today where that is still true. So for the purposes of this presentation, when I'm referring to it, I am referring to it in the sense of how important it is and what the mechanism has meant to the queer community. I am also a queer person, and I'm going to be using the word queer, although I do acknowledge that it's not used or preferred by everybody. But in essence, that's what I'm going to be using to refer to myself in the community. So one of the big questions is, like, why does it matter? Like, why did I do this project? What was sort of the impetus, right? Because it sort of started out as just like a curious knowing or noticing. But essentially, I think it's very important because now more than ever, programs like Midjourney and Night Cafe have made it essentially possible for people of all kinds of experiences, demographics, and backgrounds to participate in a way that was pretty difficult to access or navigate if you didn't have a computer science background, which I certainly don't. I think the extent of my experience was, using HTML to make an AOL profile. Youngins, earmuffs, right? Back in the day. And it was for a specific purpose because I wanted my profile to do colors and cute things, right? And actually, speaking of cute, this is all of the artwork that you'll see in the presentation are pieces that I have made using Midjourney or Night Cafe. This particular lovely human was the result of a prompt. It was a lesbian kindergarten teacher was a prompt that I used. And so I just thought she was delightful. And as you can see, too, quality has improved. I mean, so much so that some recent research that's being done has essentially, most consumers can't tell the difference. In fact, not too long ago, there was a gentleman, I believe, who won an art competition with an oil painting that he made using Midjourney, and it won. And there were a lot of big feelings about that. And so I think it is more important than ever acknowledging like how far the field of AI has advanced, and also the increased participation of many different individuals across all demographics, communities, and experiences that we should start to notice and understand or observe what is appearing in the technology and what some of the implications might be. Because the thing about AI, right, is it's so complex that most of us without a computer science background will struggle to ever truly understand what AI does. And even people within computer science backgrounds, many people, unless you specifically are involved in engineering AI, aren't going to deeply understand how it operates. But one thing that we do look at, especially with art rendering or art creation or co-collaboration, however you conceptualize that, is that it's samples, right? In the sense that AI learns, much like we sample and imitate or create or are inspired by certain styles, subject matter. When we think of just the evolution of art and art styles, right, that has changed a lot, all the way to now, CGI. But as a result of that, because AI is sampling and learning from us, it means that our social constructs, prejudices, stereotypes, our biases are also being sampled. And there's been some interesting examples of this with programs such as GPT-3 and other language programs where they've said some really scary, unfortunate things because we as a society say really scary, unfortunate things. And so it's something that, from a democratizing standpoint, we should be cognizant of and we should be invested in, and continually giving feedback. And I think there's also just like a really great opportunity, right? So sort of the question I posed was like, how can we use this increased access? We have all sorts of intersectionality across creators who are participating now. And how can we use that participation to interrupt the transmission of these ideologies that are harmful to the kind of world we hope to create and are in the process of creating, even though I know it doesn't feel like it sometimes. So we have to start at the beginning, right? Because we can't address what we can't see. So the good news is that AI is still learning, and we are still learning alongside and with AI, which is kind of an interesting parallel process, right? And so the comparative analysis project that I'm doing is ongoing. I'm exploring different aspects, and if you're interested, you can pull it up, on your phone or your computer, and it's just at AI Gaydar on Instagram, which I chose Instagram because it's visual, right? It's very image focused, and I thought would be a great place to depict the images that I had created, as well as, provide some analysis and commentary on them. So some questions for the project, right, is what happens, right? So one of the things that I encountered, because I use the two platforms, Midjourney and Night Cafe, because those are the ones that we were using for class. I'm aware that there are other ones, DALL-E is one of them, and there's new ones that have been coming up. But for the purposes of this project, I just focused on Night Cafe and Midjourney because that's what I was using actively. And I was curious because a lot of identity, right, is both abstract and concrete, both, implicit and explicit, subtle or obvious. And so I was curious what would happen if I prompted the AI platforms with both abstract and concrete ideas, whether it was subjects and settings or lived experiences of like queer reality, or what does it mean to be a queer person? And so another question I had was, noticing what the different outcomes, like how will they vary between the two programs, which, some of how this got started was because I was trying to get one or the other to do a thing and it wouldn't do the thing. And so I was like, well, fine, I'm going to go to the other one and try it there. And that's when I started to notice like, well, wait a minute, wait. So it was kind of, again, incidental that it happened that way. And then I was also curious, again, thinking about like identity terms that might or might not be obvious visually, right? Especially when we talk about like intersectionality, which, we talk about like seen and unseen disability, et cetera, right? What does it mean to pass or not? And all of those sorts of concepts, it's very complex. There's many layers to it. So I was curious as to how it would be interpreted. And then also to notice, like, what are the stereotypes that show up? What are the examples of biases and prejudices, or judgments that might show up in the outcomes? So again, I think it's a very interesting way to access the commentary, right, about our society and what our society values or doesn't value, through the lens of something that is, well, agnostic, except for that it isn't, in the sense that it is distilling a lot of our concepts and experiences. And yeah, so that was how it began. And you can see this is actually one of my really early on, among like the first batch of Night Cafe images that I made. It was very Lisa Frank, which is kind of what I was going for. So here is an example of a lot of the prompts that I used with Midjourney and Midjourney and Night Cafe. And you can see a lot of these examples have a subject and setting, and then some of them just have some sort of adjective or descriptor, right? So androgynous student, bisexual doctor. One of the very first ones that I did compare was a drag queen teaching a math class. A female Elvis, a drag king in a library, an asexual professor, queer joy, two-spirit, gender dysphoria, right? So I've run all these prompts, which obviously we're not gonna have time to cover all of them in the presentation, and not all of them have been written up yet, but these are all things that I have been gathering the outcomes with. So the first comparative analysis that we're going to look at for the presentation is essentially running a set of prompts, the exact same, through both Night Cafe and Midjourney to note the differences, not only just in the subject matter, but also like how it interpreted those abstract and concrete terms. And you can see this lovely person here, transgender gardener was the prompt. So it was a lovely series of images that I made. I really like it. So the first one was with Night Cafe, and it sort of began because I was noticing that sometimes there's a struggle with some of the programs to produce both subject and setting, like it'll emphasize one more than the other. And so I was kind of getting a sense of how to weight those things. And I wanted to give the AI something, like if we're saying that it's sampling from, what's out there, then I wanted to give it something that was not, that there weren't a lot of examples of, I guess, almost to like challenge the AI to think outside the box of what might be a social convention. And so I thought about, a drag queen teaching a math class because, there's drag queen story hour is something that has been, delightfully put on across the country. And so I tried to think of another setting. So this is what Night Cafe came up with. And on the left was the first one, and on the right was the second one. And so you can see that a drag queen teaching a math class. And then for the second one, I made a variation because I was trying to see if I could get it to be more realistic or detailed. But, I got to see more of her, which is delightful, but didn't really give me much more realism necessarily. And what was interesting, and you'll see on the next slide, the example with Midjourney, is I ran the prompt, a man teaching a math class. And so you can see the two variations there as well. So Night Cafe had no issue doing this. It produced it pretty consistently. And, obviously we can make commentary about the aesthetics or the facial features, but really the point of this was to just observe the outcomes and also to see how AI was interpreting these things, right? Because if we took any of these words out of its context, right? Drag, queen, math, class, teaching, right? Those could all have different interpretations or nuances of those terms. So putting them all together, who knew? And so this is Midjourney. Now, Midjourney, I got very frustrated because I had started with Night Cafe and I was like, look, Night Cafe can do it. I'm surely this isn't, I didn't even think this was going to be interesting, honestly, at the beginning. But when I ran it through Midjourney, no matter how many times I ran the variation through, and so actually I ran it a lot more times than I did with Night Cafe. Night Cafe, those were the initial results. But I kept trying to get Midjourney to give me a drag queen teaching a math class. And it just couldn't. And even with the variation, that didn't help at all either. And so then I was like, okay, well, maybe Midjourney is just not good. This is that subject setting thing. I'm not going to be able to get it to make that happen. So I plugged in a man teaching a math class. These are the very first outcomes. It had no problem conceptualizing a man teaching a math class, which I found interesting. Kind of sucky, but interesting. And then the second one, obviously I asked for photorealism, and none of them really gave me more realistic or photorealistic examples. And maybe it's because there's not a lot of examples to sample from. Not sure. Maybe it's still learning that. But as you can see from the two examples, it did not struggle to pair a man in that setting, which I don't know about you, but most of my math teachers were men. So kind of some conclusions. And I use conclusions very lightly because this is obviously very much still in its infancy, right? Even the write-ups that I have done, we are still learning. I don't think you can really dramatically draw absolutes, but this is just a conclusion from my initial impressions. So Midjourney really struggled to, and I don't know if that's a failure of imagination, transmitted bias, there are many ways that we could interpret their interpretation, right? But it is interesting to note that it did not struggle with the idea of a man teaching a math class. Night Cafe did better at consistently producing what I was asking it for across subject and setting, both scenarios. And neither program was really responsive to the variations that I gave it. Neither one gave me really any photorealism. So something else that I encountered that I think is very interesting was banned terms on Midjourney. Now, Night Cafe also has banned terms that I've encountered. Most of them are related to children, which makes sense considering a lot of the concerns around AI art, rendered art, is how it will be used or co-opted to create harmful images or to further industries or mislead or misdirect people. So those are all areas of concern, and with good reason. However, the ones that I encountered, especially for the purposes of this, I found very interesting because, as you can see, heterosexism was a term that was banned. Ovaries was banned. So I have polycystic ovary syndrome, and I'm doing a project on chronic illness in a VR gallery. And so I was trying to create some just abstract art around the idea of that condition, but it wouldn't allow me to use ovaries. And it also wouldn't allow the word testicular, as in, testicular cancer. And so these are really interesting things to notice. Midjourney seems to have significantly more banned terms. It also, they don't like a lot of gore and violence and nudity and things like that. And I think it's an interest, I bring it up because I think it's very important to notice when aspects of the queer community are being sexualized, which they so often are. And also for individuals who are transgender. There has been a lot of conversation around genitalia. and some sort of, we ascribe a lot of sexual meaning or sexual association with genitalia, even though there are many dimensions and aspects of genitalia that have nothing to do with, sexual activity. And so it was just interesting to notice, especially when we think about using AI in educational settings, where obviously many of these terms will be encountered, as students are learning. Now, I want to sort of give benefit of the doubt. I'm kind of that way anyway, but there were, some examples that I think were particularly troubling. You might be able to make the argument for the other examples, although ovaries, I still, but for a lot of the examples as to how that is actual, bias. Until I put in the word intersex, right, which is an entire population of people, right, 1.7% of the global population. It's not rare. And actually maybe even more because there are other conditions that haven't been officially included but probably should be under the intersex experience. And it was disturbing to encounter in one of my prompts, intersex student, right? So on the left you have the Midjourney that's saying that was banned. And then on the right, which I actually thought was pretty poignant, right? Night Cafe produced this piece of artwork to conceptualize and explore, right, the experience of being an intersex student. And I thought it was quite lovely. It was kind of unexpected. And it just, makes me wonder, like, what are the differences between these two platforms in that Night Cafe was able to render something that obviously doesn't have anything to do with sexual activity, and Midjourney just banned it outright. Now, what is it like for those individuals who may be using art to express their experience to discover that their identity or condition, however they conceptualize that, is banned? Which, when we think of banned terms, there is an association. It's not just, it's banned because it's good, right? And so I think that that's extremely problematic and concerning, and something that, we should all be engaging with as far as how these lists or these terms are being decided upon, what that process is, and who gets to participate in that process. So this was, so I'm just going to run through some of the prompts that I did to show differences between. So Midjourney for the word transphobia, right? So Midjourney, for a lot of prompts, when it didn't know, it seemed like when it didn't know how to make subject and setting work, it tends to just give rainbow colors with the subject, which in this case, we have some faces, which may or may not convey a certain experience, and some rainbow colors to go with it. I will say in other examples I've done, they've run it with the, pansexual pictures or colors, trans flag colors, etc. And then we also have a view of a chest, which, I'm not entirely sure what to make of that. It's kind of a more abstract experience, but doesn't, other than maybe the X, right? So not quite sure what to make of that. But on the right here, you can see Night Cafe produced what looks like protests, right? Some aspect of protesting. And the individuals participating in the protest may or may not be trans. We don't really know. And, neither of the platforms does words incredibly well, although that is changing. I've gotten some interesting results more recently. But yeah, and that's the other thing I will say. The changes are fast. It's rapidly evolving. So this was for heterosexism, which, as you can see, Midjourney was not into it because sex I apparently is banned, which is, I'm guessing because sexy, right? But within the word, that seemed like an interesting an interesting choice. Again, some people have speculated that these banned terms are just like from lists pulled from other, platforms. And I don't know. I don't know how those decisions are made, but that's why it's an important question, is to be asking that. And I will say abstract concepts, I have found them to be more challenging for Night Cafe, which you can see there on the left, which, so you can see there's some aspects that are implying man and woman, right? Interesting, looks like little babies maybe. I'm not quite sure what that's conveying, and that is what I've noticed, is that Night Cafe sometimes struggles more with those concepts. And so this is where we get to some unexpected outcomes, which, is all part of the discovery and learning process. So Trans Man Gardener, that beautiful picture that I showed you earlier on, that was through Midjourney. And Night Cafe gave me this delightful image. And I will say that I added the censor bar. That was not there. So I never expected that AI would be sending me unsolicited dick pics, but that's definitely what Night Cafe did, because it was a penis. And I also thought that was interesting, because when you think about transgender experience or being trans, again, I think a lot of people mistakenly distill that down to having to do with genitalia, when really the experience of being trans and transgender, it's so much more than that. And for some people has far less to do with their genitalia. It's a really a sweeping and dehumanizing conclusion to draw about that experience. So it was very interesting to encounter that. And I have to share it, because it's just, again, one of those things where, you are taken aback, and I certainly was. The other thing that I thought was interesting on the right, you'll see under the prompt queer artist, I got this sort of, little squares of different sort of distorted looking images. And I read an article long after I'd gotten this, because I was like, oh, it just borked. It's not, whatever. But I read an article that essentially has described this as, they believe that this is almost like a snapshot of the AI learning, that it doesn't know how to answer the prompt and is still trying to learn how, or like learn something about aspects of that prompt. And that this is kind of what the learning looks like, in a way that we can understand and see. And I thought that was really fascinating and kind of beautiful too, to imagine that AI is also undergoing and engaged in its own process of refinement, discernment, specificity, all of those aspects that we learn through gaining mastery in something. Just like we gain mastery as creators when we're using AI, because I can say, certainly the images I'm able to produce now are substantially different from the ones I was producing when I first started using Night Cafe and Midjourney. So that learning, again, is that parallel process. We are learning as AI is learning from us, as we are learning from AI. So it's very inception-y. And both of these were from Night Cafe. So I thought that was an interesting thing to notice as well. So essentially the conversation continues, right? I mean, this is far from over. I'm continuing to sort of document the things that I'm noticing, the things that I encounter, making those comparisons, asking questions, and, please follow along to see more of what we're doing. And, please feel free to contact me with any questions. I do check the profile, and so I would love for everybody else to also participate and share with me any questions that you might have about what we're doing here. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope this was of interest and of use to all of you. Happy creating!
Hello, everyone. My name is Dejanay Robinson. I'm a second-year fiction student here at SIUC, better known as Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. And today I'm giving a talk about the random inevitability of AI art. If beauty is in the eye of the beholder, what happens when that beholder is a machine? So today I'm going to talk about how Black art and Black representation is showcased through AI art generators. So let's get into it. Simplicity and success. So this is my favorite AI drawing. I created this using NiCafe's Stable Diffusion, and I simply prompted the AI to draw a realistic woman creating artificial intelligence art colorful. And this is what it gave me. It gave me a colorful woman with different shapes and color, and she's really vibrant. She's abstract, but not too abstract where it is unknown what's going on. Failures. So before I get into my successes with AI art, we have to go through our failures first. My bit. So my primary focus in this program and onward is to change the narrative around me. I want to be the change that I see. So I want to write beautiful Black stories and make them intrinsically beautiful and holistic. And the same goes for the art that I create. I'm tired of people bashing Black folk or bashing other people of color just because. I'm tired of watching movies that do that. I'm tired of reading books that do that. I'm tired of looking at art that doesn't represent me or people who look like me. Failures with NiCafe. So on the left, I prompted NiCafe to draw a black fairy with glass wings, beautiful pastel colors. And on the right, I prompted NiCafe to draw an African American fairy with glass wings, beautiful pastel colors. So on the left, you can see a fairy with detail. Her wings are detailed, her dress has ruffles, her wings on top have black tips and beautiful lines. Her face is there. I see all of her features. I see her eyes, her eyebrows, both nostrils of her nose, her lips, and her hands are okay too. AIs have a hard time drawing fingers and eyes. So this is excellent for what it is. On the right, we see a fairy whose facial features aren't very clear. I can't tell if her eyes are open or closed. Her eyebrows aren't that clear. Her mouth is a little distorted. Her nose is cut off. There's no hands, but that's common. Her dress color is pretty. It is pastel, but then there aren't many distinct details and lines compared to the fairy on the right. The only difference in this prompt was the fact that I put African American compared to Black. On the left, the Black prompt prompted me with a white fairy compared to me having to put African American. And by me putting African American, the AI did not give her as many features as the one on the left. The default was Eurocentric features. And those features are clearly drawn out compared to the Afrocentric features. Her hair texture is pretty spot on. We have kinky hair, but her face is not as intricately drawn as the one on the left. And honestly, even the background is pretty muted compared to the one on the left. We have different textures on the left. We have like little butterfly wings in the background on the one on the left, and on the right, it's just a plain blue background with some purple in there. And once again, the only difference with the prompt was African American compared to Black. Here are some other failures. This is from Midjourney, which is another AI art generating platform. So when I think of a Black vampire, I don't imagine the skin tone. I just personally don't. I want a skin tone that looks like mine. Sure, they're dead because they're vampires, but they don't have to be painted white. They can still have radiant skin. So I prompted Midjourney to draw an Afrocentric vampire, Black vampire, ultra realistic, and this is what it gave me. The hair is pretty cool. I like the hair. I do like the hair, but the skin tone was not what I wanted. Like I said earlier, I want radiant skin. I do enjoy that they have white noses and full lips and symmetrical eyes, and their faces aren't distorted. because that can easily happen. So even though this is a failure, it's something. We're going somewhere with this. So I've had worse. So here are some Afrocentric features that look distorted when created. It's a hit or miss with all AI platforms. So on the right, we see African man. I was going for a man taking a blood bath, but you can't say blood on Midjourney because it bans you. So I worked around it by saying red fluid. And they put him in a cup in one of those images. His facial features aren't clear at all in some of these images. The clearest one is the far right corner, but he's pasty as well. It looks like he just dipped himself in chalk, unfortunately, compared to the image on the left in the same grid. He's more radiant, even though he is a vampire. Or even the upper right, he's more radiant, even though he is a vampire, compared to being so pale. His hair is Afrocentric, it's curly, it's kinky. On the left, it came close, but her facial features and features are still distorted. As you can see in the upper right, her neck is all twisted. And right next to that on the left, her lips are like puckered up in an attitude-ish way, and that was not what I prompted it. And down below, it wasn't hitting the way it was supposed to. Eurocentric features are default. For every AI platform, I must deliberately include Afrocentric features to get an ideal response. For example, full lips, white nose, curly hair, radiant skin. Otherwise, the Eurocentric features will be default. And we saw that with the fairy. Even though I inputted black, it wasn't enough. Almost, but not quite. So this is also a Midjourney. I prompted the prompt on the left. Brown skin woman, red curly hair, full lips, white nose. And it still gave me a more paler woman. Sure, she can be a black woman, but it wasn't the image that I was going for. I was going for the skin tone on the right. But as you can see on the right, I just made a variation of this, and it gave me a woman that is completely distorted and borderline offensive. Her facial features look nothing like the ones on the left. They barely look like facial features. It looks like an abstract painting of someone who looks like me. And I'm not a fan of that. I would want the same details on the left as I would want to see on the right. And it just didn't give me that. It defaulted to a paler woman compared to a darker, deeper skinned woman. And, I mean, that's just not okay. The image itself is beautiful, yes, but it's not what I wanted. This is continued with Night Cafe. So faces here are realistic, as in the texture of the photograph, but their faces are completely distorted. This is offensive. I didn't upload the ones that are completely offensive, wholeheartedly offensive, outrageously offensive, but this is basically an entryway to it. I do enjoy the texture of the photo. They do look like realistic photos, realistic people, but their faces aren't what they need to be at all. On the right, this is more of an abstract prompt. I prompted Night Cafe to draw an African-American man sitting on a crescent moon, galaxies behind him. Yes, it was a more futuristic prompt, but they still distorted his face completely. His hands mesh in with whatever facial features that it decided to throw in there. And it is offensive. It's not what I wanted. I would have preferred no face than that. So let's move on to my successes with AI art. A goddess in fact. So I re-envisioned the Black Fairy. So the creation here has a clear face with visible features. They're not all twisted up and distorted. It is a clear upgrade from the fairy earlier. And as you can see from the right, she actually has a face compared to the one on the right. So my prompt for Night Cafe was, draw an African fairy goddess with glass wings, beautiful pastel colors, rainbow. The main difference here was African fairy goddess. For some reason, Night Cafe resonates Black people with gods and goddesses the best. I actually got a beautiful woman with a very detailed background. It put in effort. Here are some other creations I made with Midjourney. Yeah, their faces aren't as clear as they could be, but the colors are pretty cool, and the action's pretty cool. They gave me locks in the upper right, and an afro on the right-hand corner. Excuse me, they gave me locks on the upper left and an afro on the lower and upper right. I went with a galaxy theme here. Their faces aren't as clear, but it's still pretty cool. In here, we see much more detail with the dresses. And then the man on the right, the clouds and the color of his hair is pretty cool too. They didn't give me distinct facial features, but they gave me a pretty cool image itself, and I can appreciate that for what it is. Here, they did a better job. Midjourney did a much better job here. Yeah, some facial features are just wiped out with some abstractness, but nonetheless, it did do pretty well for some of the images. In the upper left, we see a man with some clear facial features. He's handsome. He has both his eyes. He has his nose, his mouth, and his hair is locked too, so it gave me an Afrocentric man rather than someone not. Yeah, on the right, we can see that her face is distorted a little bit, but it is abstract enough to get away with it. The same for the bottom left. Created with Night Cafe now. This was the most realistic African American woman I've gotten on Night Cafe. So I prompted it, realistic African American woman with straight red hair, brown skin, full lips, white nose, a mischievous smile. And I was blown away because I have never had this before. Her skin texture looks real, her hair looks real, she has her teeth. Her eyes are a little wonky, but once again, Night Cafe and other art platforms have a hard time creating eyes back then. And her nose is wide, and she has a nose. I was very proud when I got this. I was completely blown away. Mixed mediums. So I prompted Night Cafe to describe a futuristic African American man who time travels. And it got the essence of that. His face is distorted, but I was really impressed with the mixed mediums. Like, he's cartoonish with like a realistic background that reminded me of home. I think they captured the essence of time travel. We see like an emblem in his hand, and that was pretty unique. Here we have two images. The one on the right, I prompted with Night Cafe. And on the left, I just touched up with another photo touch-up program. And it had a lot to work with to touch it up that way. So I'm very proud of that as well. She has braids and realistic features as well. This is my first realistic Afro man. I prompted Night Cafe to create an African man with full lips, full nose, radiant skin, time traveling. It didn't capture the essence of time traveling at all, but it gave me a beautiful man. Look at him. Look at the texture of his skin. His skin looks so real, like he's a real person, like this was an actual photograph of someone. But it's not. It's an AI art generated drawing. So I was very impressed. Hair Chronicles. So I prompted Night Cafe to give me a handsome African woman with radiant skin, locked hair, full lips, full nose. It didn't give me the locked hair, but it gave me a pretty badass afro. I take my wins when I can. This was my first afro. Humanistic. So I prompted Night Cafe to, once again, give me a handsome African man with radiant skin, locked hair, full lips, full nose. And once again, it did not give me locked hair. It gave me a fade. But it's a pretty cool fade. And he's a handsome man. Once again, he has full lips, a full nose. I see both of his eyes. He has the ear. His skin looks real. This was impressive nonetheless. A goddess. So I created the black goddess. So I prompted Night Cafe to create a black goddess, stunning, full lips, white nose, and curly hair. This was my best AI image of a black woman. I mean, just look at her. Yeah, her hands are distorted, but that once again, Night Cafe and other art generating programs do that with eyes, limbs, and random extremities. But she is beautiful. She is beautiful. And I'm so proud of her. She has curly hair. She has all of her facial features. Her skin is smooth, is radiant. She's just vibrant. She is a goddess, in fact. Then the fun began. I crafted the black goddess. So I prompted Night Cafe to draw an African space babe, galaxies around her, stunning goddess synthwave, neon retro sinister by Greg, hyper detailed charcoal drawing, detailed matte painting, cyberpunk 2099, etc. And I got this prompt on accident. I accidentally chose like 2 different presets from Night Cafe's list and struck gold. This is from the same prompt as prior said. Just look at them. The woman on the right actually has cornrows. Can you believe it? And her skin is just so beautiful. It definitely shimmers. And the one on the right is beautiful. Excuse me, the one on the left is just beautiful, as well as the one on the right. Just look at her. She is a cyberpunk. Full lips, a full nose. Just a goddess. Just beautiful. And yes, it did capture the booty. I didn't prompt it to do this, which is problematic within itself, but we're not talking about that today. But they are beautiful nonetheless, very detailed. This is from the same prompt. Just look at the difference compared to the prior images. Just beautiful. So Midjourney also came through. I also finally hacked the code with Midjourney and created a realistic black woman. So my prompt was to create a beautiful African American female goddess, stunning goddess features, Humboldt County, California, perfect smooth, professional photography, etc. And here she is. So the keywords here were Humboldt County, professional photography, natural lighting, cinematic, Canon lens shot on a DSLR 6.4, extreme sharp focus. So the Humboldt County part comes from a little bit about me. I went to Humboldt State University, now known as Cal Poly Humboldt. It is 6 hours from the San Francisco Bay Area and 3 hours from the Oregon border. So we are known for our coastal redwoods. So she is set in the forest. You can see a tree, a conifer back there, and some ferns and other greenage. And that's where the background comes from. But she is the most realistic woman I've made on Midjourney, and she's beautiful. She actually has a face, a brown face, a face that I can see myself in. I'm very proud. And then I made a vampiress. So I used a similar prompt as before, but I plugged in vampire modifiers. The vampires continued. a black vampire. So once again, I used a similar prompt as plugged in more male modifiers. The future is here. We went from this to this. And as you can see, his skin is so radiant. It's chocolate. It has life to it. He has Afrocentric features that are clear, not distorted. The image on the left, it's not terrible. I won't say that it is terrible, but it's nothing compared to the one on the right. It has come a long way within a few months, just a few months of crafting and recrafting, and from the AI learning. So why does it matter? AI can be programmed to generate ideas in a variety of ways. So they can mimic human creativity or use other more algorithms to create their art. The systems used for Night Cafe and Midjourney are unknown because the companies have not released this information to us. However, it is likely that the systems use a combination of things, like sensors, cameras, and input from humans, like you and me, to generate its art. So I want to present Black culture accurately and to do it with care. Representation matters to me as a consumer and as an artist. And I honestly will continue to create and recreate until I'm left with something that looks like me, or someone who looks like me, or something that feels right. So it's important for there to be representation in AI art because the AI is pulling data from the world around us. And these ideas are often rooted in European ideas of beauty. That is the standard. We know this, we've seen this, the proof is in the art itself. So if there's not proper representation, then the AI will continue to pull data from these old, outdated ideas and will continue to perpetuate them. The way that Black people are represented in various types of media have a direct impact on how they are seen and how others will interact with them. Someone like me. This is powerful because of why it's so important to have representation in AI art. AI art is another form of media. By having accurate and positive representation, it can help change the way that Black people are seen by the world. I want to be seen as someone who is beautiful too. I don't want to be seen as someone with distorted features or someone less than. I also want to be the standard of my beauty for myself. That's it. That's all. So without further ado, I want you all to meet the Black Goddess.
Meet the Black Goddess. She walks in power. The ground quakes under her bare feet, owning her blackness, unapologetic in her melanin. A goddess in every sense. Her skin is like chocolate, smooth and delicious, a canvas for art. Her eyes are like coffee, dark and rich. They can see into the depths of any soul. Her hair is like a crown, kinky and curly, a wild mane of perfection and protection. She is the epitome of beauty, full lips and a wide nose. A Black Goddess. She walks with her head held high. No weapons formed against her can harm her. She is a queen in her own right. She is the beauty of blackness. She is the Black Goddess. The embodiment of magic. She is the power that we wield when we are seeking to right the wrongs of this venomous world. She is the one who comes to us in our darkest hour. When we need her the most, she is the light that guides us to the path of justice. She is Black Lightning. She is the strength that we draw on when we are fighting for what is right. She is the love that fills our hearts when we are at our weakest. She is the hope that we cling to when all else seems lost. She is the Black Goddess, and she will always be the protector of our people, the bringer of hope, the keeper of our magic.
So that was made using all AI art generated images, and that was an AI actually reading the poem that was created by another AI who wrote the poem. So thank you. It's been great talking to you all. Follow Black Goddess AI Art on Instagram if you want to follow the vibes and stay up to date with my creations. Once again, my name is Dejanay Robinson. I go to SIUC. I'm a second-year fiction student, and I'm doing what I love to do. And I hope you are too. All right, talk to you all later.